Hi, and welcome to the State of Shakespeare. I'm Jim Elliott,
Garrett Vandermeer.
and today on the program we have William Downs. Hello, William.
Hello, how are you?
Hi,
Excellent.
William. Is it William or Will?
I go by both. Let's go with Will today.
Okay.
We're all
Okay. Hi, Will.
friends.
Okay. Hi,
Hi.
Will. Before founding and becoming the artistic director of the Classics on the Rocks, Will Downs spent years honing his craft in and around New York City, participating in master classes with Cecily Berry, John Barton, and as part of the Oxford Shakespeare Company. He's had the honor of playing some of Shakespeare's most delightful clowns, such as Dogberry, Dromio, Touchstone, Malvolio, and Launce. On the more serious side, he's played such roles as Macbeth, Othello, Roderick, and Petruchio. His directing credits include Julius Caesar, Twelfth Night, and The Winter's Tale, with Classics on the Rocks. He also teaches Q script workshops and master classes around New York City, along with private Shakespeare coaching. So, Will, welcome. We're going to get into the First Folio because you use First Folio a lot, but let's start with what
Yeah.
is Classics on the Rocks?
So, Classics on the Rocks is an independent company here in New York City. Our mission is to create a warm and intimate environment where actors and audience can experience the magic of face-to-face theatrical communication using Shakespeare as our foundation. And then we look at the timeless themes and the classic works that define and redefine humanity through intimately staged productions and acting workshops.
Wow, that is quite a mission statement.
Yeah, there you go.
I am nothing if not ambitious. So I started the company about 6 years ago with my wife. We started off with a couple of just staged readings of his plays just to kind of prove to the world and to myself that this idea would actually work, that Shakespeare literally is his text. All you really need to do to create beautiful Shakespeare is to just have actors that trust the words and to tell the story. I'm a very firm believer in it doesn't need to be fancy or fluffy and, frills, big concepts, bold costuming, just simple, kind of like Peter O'Toole once said, bare bones and a passion.
Where do you exist?
I'm based out in New York. Actually, we are out of the Alchemical Theater Laboratory over on West 14th Street. So that's where we do most of our performances. We have a one-night-only Shakes Day, which is sort of like scenes in introspective of all his works combined by a common theme. And then I do, like as I said, I do the workshops. I do a workshop called Working Classics, which is really a class. We take one act of a play a week. We do a whole play over 5 weeks, and we break it down for comprehension and just kind of understanding what's being said, what happens between, what's happening scene to scene, act to act, moment to moment. And then we look at how the folio can help inform those choices and help you interpret the text and how to interpret these characters, using nothing but the text and making those bold, outlandish choices that Shakespeare's characters really do require.
So if I'm coming to a Classics on the Rocks production, what am I in for? What makes it different from the Shakespeare Theater in New Jersey, for example?
I would like to think that, again, because we use First Folio, there was a very clear storytelling. I strip away the fluff and the filler. I strip away, the concepts and things like that. And I really just focus on the story and the relationships between these characters, really as Shakespeare wrote them, not as we intend them to be or what we think they should be. I do not adapt. I do fully uncut folio productions. I use a lot of original practices, so I do have a lot of that audience engagement. The theater that we work in is a really intimate 60-seat white box theater. So, and I like to really incorporate the audience into the shows and into these performances. So when you're watching a show, like if we're, for example, doing a Julius Caesar, everybody watching the show now becomes the plebeian. So Mark Antony and Brutus aren't just talking to the actors on stage, they're talking to everybody. I'm not like saying, okay, Jim, jump up on stage and act with me, but I am going to look at you and we're going to tell you this story.
And are we going to see actors in costume? Are we going to see sets?
No sets. We have acting blocks and a couple of small hand props just to kind of tell the story a little more clear, make sure that you know what's happening. And costumes are kind of like a timeless theme, so it's a modern dress style.
And you also mentioned Q script workshops.
Yes.
Is that using First Folio Q scripts?
Wait, what's a Q script?
So a Q script is what we mostly think of what Shakespeare had used because it was so expensive to print. Also because there were no such thing as copyright laws. Anybody could really take any of these plays and just kind of pass them off as their own. So in a way to protect yourself from that, the acting companies and the theaters that Shakespeare worked with, the Globe especially, would only pass out the parts to the actors. You wouldn't have a full script. You would just have your part with a couple of cue lines. So what I do with those, and I think those are what are super important and super helpful for an actor, is it's really making you actively listen as opposed to just kind of following along, waiting for your line to come up and speak. You actually have to listen for those 3 specific words before you start to speak.
Well,
and
where do those come from? You can't go to Drama Bookshop and just pick up a cue script or a whole set of cue scripts for a play, can you?
No, you can't. Like for me, I do it myself. I have a couple of different online folio versions that I use, and I just cut and paste them and turn them into cue scripts and then pass them out for the workshops.
It sounds like a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of work, but it's also a labor of love. I think because Shakespeare was really so actor friendly and it was really written for actors by actors, a lot of what's in there is very helpful nowadays. I like to say classical texts were written in an actor-friendly way that has kind of been lost over time with modern, with the modern editions that kind of take the best parts of everything
and put them into the script.
Is working with a cue script like that, is that standard practice for original practice theaters?
It is, yeah. A lot of companies do that. They'll hand out just the cue scripts. There's actually a couple of companies that I researched that actually do use cue scripts, the scrolls in their performances and completely work the way Shakespeare did 400 years ago. They'll have a few hours of rehearsal before presenting a performance.
Rules.
So are they on book?
Yeah, they would have their scrolls on hand, in hand and actually using them. There was one production that I had researched where they were talking about 2 gents, and Lance would actually use his scroll as the staff. This is my staff. This is my sister. All that. All of those lines that he has in his first speech when he's talking about his goodbye.
Right, the way we're taught in the acting classes to use the script as the universal prop. Right?
Yeah. And they actually go forward with that into the actual performance and use it in all manner of crazy ways.
Do you have experience having worked in other original practice theaters, or is this something that you're coming to independently?
This is something I came to independently. I started out with, let's call it traditional Shakespearean acting techniques. And then as I got further and further into it, I worked with a company called the Oxford Shakespeare Company here in New York City. The founder, Ron Song-Destro, was really the first person that kind of opened my eyes to sort of like this whole idea of Shakespeare really being the concept, and his storytelling and his words are the story, are the concept of Shakespeare. A couple of years later, I found a book by Giles Block called Speaking the Speech, and he talked a lot about folio punctuation and how that also helps inform phrasings and how that can help you create your character. It's just been a continuous fall down the rabbit hole. I've got deeper and deeper into it with Patrick Tucker's work. And the more I looked into it and the more I, studied and read it, it's like, yeah, this makes a whole lot of sense from an acting standpoint.
And so you've chosen the folio as the authoritative text, right? And there are some alternatives, right?
Oh, absolutely. You have the foul papers, you have the quartos, you have, any of the modern editions. When actors come to me for the first time and they're completely freaked out that I'm saying, all right, we're going to use this First Folio, but they're like, I need something modern just to kind of reference. So I always direct them to the Arden, which is, to me, is kind of like the modern authoritative text of Shakespeare.
You say that using the First Folio is so good for actors. What are the benefits of using the First Folio from an actor's perspective?
First Folio is kind of like acting shorthand to me. And what I mean is that, if you're following the structure as it appears in the folio with the commas, with the periods, with, any of those long form spellings or any of the gaps or all. So when it's all in there and you're looking at it from an acting perspective, it kind of opens you up and it's like, oh, wow, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Even the way they have the lines laid out. A good example is Romeo and Juliet in the balcony scene. Romeo's line, "It is my lady, oh, it is my love, oh, that she knew she were." In the First Folio, that's a full 16-beat line, as opposed to, normally what they'll do is they'll break it down into the perfect 10 meters over the course of a couple of lines. And for me, the benefit of seeing it run across a full line is it kind of informs Romeo. It's like, wow, this is something that he has to get out in one breath. And I'm certainly not going to say that, if you don't use Folio, you're never going to make the right choices. I mean, obviously, there's really no such thing as the right or wrong way to do it. But to me, using the Folio kind of gets you there quicker. So you're there, you figure it out, and then you're able to go on and explore other aspects or even just perfect those moments a lot quicker than you would if you're using, a modernized version or something different where there's more questions or there's more like ambiguity because it's been diluted or just kind of piecemealed together.
So you're talking about the purest form of Shakespeare.
Or the form that we've seen that we can acknowledge in 1623, this was the first printing of all of his plays combined from members of his company that worked with him and collected them. These were the versions of the plays that they felt were the closest to what they performed or what they watched perform.
Yeah, well, it certainly stands to reason that the text in the folio would have been lovingly curated by people that were in a position to have a pretty good idea of what the intent was.
Yeah.
And then sent to the compositor, who may or may not have made artistic choices or
choices. Yeah, exactly.
Or errors, which, by the way, and I mentioned this before on previous podcasts, but it's amazing to go to the museum at London's Globe and go to the printing demonstration there. It is so eye-opening about the task of the compositor.
So, William, we have been spending the last couple of days wading through the Play On project.
Yes.
And we've interviewed the founder. We've also interviewed two of the playwrights, and we've also interviewed a critic of the Play On project. How do you feel about that project?
When it first came out, I was definitely one of the ones that was jumping on my soapbox, screaming, "This is wrong. How dare you translate Shakespeare?" However, I've seen about 5 of them now, and I think they're absolutely invaluable. The way they translated the plays, because it was from like an artistic performing aspect, I feel like these plays are now a better bridge to the original text than what you get like if you're reading a Folger or a modern edition. Because what it does, and this was one of the things that one of the playwrights mentioned in the talkback, what he had said was he just wanted to open up the text. And yeah, like there is a good portion of it that was Shakespeare and there was a portion of it that was modern. But the seamless integration was so incredible to me. It was like, wow, I know these plays pretty well. And even I'm like, oh, that's what that line means. I get it now. And it's been nothing but that. The other thing, because it's, with the comedies, I feel like a lot of the clowns are becoming a little more understandable and clear. I also saw the As You Like It one. And Touchstone is not one of Shakespeare's clowns that have kind of aged well. And the updates and the modernization of his language just made it so more relevant and so more like understandable, which I thought was wonderful. It was like, this was one of the first times I was like, okay, yeah, this is really funny.
Well, that's fascinating because as a First Folio guy, I would have thought that you would have been like, no. But I guess seeing is believing.
Seeing and hearing is believing. And one of the big things that they always mention at the beginning of the plays is let's hear a play. And that's what it was 400 years ago. If you were standing in the yard there was a lot of stuff you didn't catch because there was a million other things going on. So you really did have to listen and pay attention and hear. So you were hearing it for the first time. And that was a lot like this experience. We were hearing these plays in a different way for the first time. And again, I was very taken aback because, as I said, when I first heard about it, I was kind of like, what are they doing? You don't need to modernize Shakespeare. And yeah, just kind of going to it and kind of experiencing it and listening to what the project was eye-opening for me. I will always say that you're never going to replace Shakespeare, but to introduce new people and more people to Shakespeare, I think these translations are absolutely on the spot.
Well, it's a great segue to the piece that you've chosen to share with us today, which is Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 7, the famous "If it were done when 'tis done" speech. And we'll hear that the language and the imagery in this speech are incredibly dense and definitely take some unpacking. So let's dive into it. Would you like to read it for us?
Sure.
This is Will Downes doing Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 7, the character of Macbeth.
If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success, that but this blow might be the be-all and end-all here. But here, upon this bank and school of time, jumped the life to come. But in these cases, We still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instruction, which being taught return to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips. He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then, as his host, who should against his murderers shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculty so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. And pity, like a naked newborn babe striding the blast, or heaven's cherubims horsed upon the sightless couriers of the airs, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. I have no spur to prick the side of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Dot, 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 dot.
There are some relatively obscure terms here, and a lot is worth going into. But I wanted to start with, for those of us that are following along on the website, our text has this at line 480, and it's the line that says, "But here, upon this bank and school of time, we jump the life to come," which is, well, gosh, what does that mean?
I think it is a reference, a biblical reference to Christ, the fisher of souls. And he's talking about here where Jesus collects us. If we jump that and get to heaven, we still have to deal with what's right in front of us.
Here's where the folio can get potentially a little bit thorny, because I've seen some editors change school to shoal.
Shoal, yeah. So it's it's the bank of the river and then the side of the river, yeah.
Yeah, with the notion that this is the image is that this place or this space
jumping over the river. And yeah, it is one of those things that, again, because there's no definitive way to do Shakespeare, either one of them to me works. I think both of those, both of them work. It's just a matter of an image that you're looking to create. If we wanted to go a little bit further into like the history and King James and the Catholics returning, that the bank and the school of fishers and all of that stuff makes sense. If we're looking for a very clearer image of what he's talking about jumping, obviously bank and skull would be effective. And what I look at in this piece is, because he's so far over the place, and one of the big overlying things with this is conscience and him wanting to do the right thing, especially in this piece, I do tend to think that he is thinking about his immortal soul.
Because he's about to have regicide.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that resonates with me with the idea of shoal is that a shoal is a temporary thing.
Yeah.
Just like the mortal life is a temporary thing, and he's willing to risk everything to make it stand on this mortal plane of existence.
Right.
So if you choose the folio as the authoritative version, you've made a choice. You made a choice. Yeah. You can only choose one.
You can only choose one. Absolutely.
So there are some other relatively obscure terms, and for us and for our listeners, maybe you can help untangle these. But okay, The word trammel. What does trammel mean?
Trammel. If we can.
And the context is trammel up the consequence.
Trammel up the consequence. It's one of those words where it's like, if the assassination could just wrap up the consequence and and it would be done in one fell swoop.
So trammel is to wrap something up.
If the assassination could wrap up the consequence and put it all together, we'd be done with it.
Then surcease, and the context is catch with his surcease success.
Catch with his surcease success, with his perfect success.
Surcease it means perfect.
I would kind of incorporate the idea of this perfect plan, going with the full image of the assassination, wrapping up the consequence, and with the perfect success, it would be done. That this blow might be the be all and end all.
Interesting.
Jim, do you have a different interpretation?
Yes, surcease, I would say, is to finish, to end.
With his finish. So when Duncan is finished,
right. Then I'm good. So if the assassination could trammel, and you said wrap up the consequence, and in addition to the consequence, you're catching his ends as you're fishing in the net. Then success. Because I don't want to deal with the consequence, which goes back to what you guys were just talking about, the consequence being his immortal soul.
Yeah.
A chalice. Commend the ingredients of this poison chalice.
I mean, I think a chalice is just such a better image than a goblet. When I see a chalice, I just see like this gaudy golden cup that's 2 feet high and long stem and, bedazzled with jewels and everything. It's so perfect and it's so indicative to life and the crown, and it's poisoned.
Here's one that's really tricky. Born his faculties. And this is the context is he's talking about Duncan when he says, besides this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek.
Faculties, I think, is just his bearing, the way he presents himself as king. If we wanted to, modernize the text, I would say he's very humble in his presentation as king, or the way he presents himself as king.
The deep damnation of his taking off. I guess his is Duncan again in this context, right?
Yeah,
Duncan's taking off.
We're talking about the killing of Duncan, and just how the horrible thing that happens to him. But also, it's also one of those things, when he's talking about, the damnation of regicide.
We're now back at the immortal soul.
Yeah, it's definitely going back to that whole immortal soul thing. It's, aside from everything else, this is going to damn me for so much.
And taking off is a euphemism for assassinating, huh? So
Yeah.
Let's see, what else?
Striding the blast.
Striding the blast. Pity like a naked newborn babe. Striding the blast.
I would say striding the blast is, like almost a continuation, the first image, leading into Heaven's Cherubim's horse upon, that next image, but it's sort of like a new child, the new child entering the world.
So what is the blast?
I would say the blast is birth.
Oh,
striding the blast. I see. It seems to me that the blast kind of refers to the wind, maybe, or the storm. I see a cherub with wings floating in on this.
Yeah, the horse upon the sightless courier, the Heaven's Cherubims walking and coming through the wind, the sightless couriers of the wind and whatnot. Yeah, definitely.
I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent.
There is literally no good reason for me to do this except my ambition.
And so the spur, in this case, pricking the sides of intent, it's a metaphor for...
Yeah, it's a metaphor for... There's no reason for me to do this. I have no reason.
Other than my spurs that go jingle, jangle, jingle.
It's an equestrian metaphor.
Yeah.
And let's see.
Now we're getting to the one that I'm really interested in.
Oh, yeah, right. Vaulting ambition. Kind of follows the equestrian metaphor. Even further, right?
Yeah, if we're going to lean into that metaphor, then it's the horse jumping over the hurdle. But I would also say, vaulting ambition, he's jumping over his state in life. He was given, he's jumping over the respectful lineage,
Maybe it harkens back to we jump the life to come, and we close with vaulting ambition, which or leaps itself and falls on the other.
That's the one I don't know about.
That one is really tricky to piece out. Or leaps itself and falls on the other.
And William, you added a ... at the end. What do you mean by all that?
Well, I always have argued that at some point Lady M has entered the room and has heard at least a part of this section. And falls on the other is kind of stage direction for Macbeth, as he's pacing and he's wandering around, and he finally turns around and there she is. So it's almost like an unfinished line. But to look at it, which leaps itself, we're continuing on with this jumping metaphor. His ambition is jumping itself and falling on the other side, leading him to be king.
So you would say that the end of the sentence is which leaps itself and falls on the other side?
I would suggest to an actor experiment with that. Finish that off, but because Lady M is there and staring daggers at him, you don't get to finish it, and all of a sudden all of his resolve is now somewhat compromised because, and again we go into the question of who is the stronger character and are they a team, and all of that stuff that we can spend another entire podcast talking about, the dynamic between Lord and Lady M.
Yep. Yeah, I always find that line very tricky because it falls on the other, and I'm not sure what the other is referring to.
I always imagine that what this means is that Macbeth is approaching this assassination with a real sense of foreboding, and his fear is that he's using this metaphor to talk about his fear that he's riding this horse called ambition, and this horse is going to jump over this obstacle, which is Duncan. The murder of Duncan is the thing that he must get over, and it's ambition that's going to carry him over this obstacle, but his fear is that his ambition is going to overleap itself, and that when he gets to the other side, there will come the fall. And the image that I get from that is that Macbeth himself being crushed underneath the ambition.
Oh, yeah.
Leapt the obstacle.
I told you it was a good image. That's brilliant.
That is a great. I mean, yes, it is a beautiful image. A very good one. Now, obviously, it's very apropos to everything that happens in this speech. And one of the things that I like about Folio is, just kind of, if we're looking through this text, is a lot of the capital letters in this speech. If you just go through and say all of the capital letters, it literally gives you the whole thought train of Mackers in this moment, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and it's assassination, consequence, success, bank and shoal, school, cases, bloody instructions, justice, chalice, kinsman, subjects, deed, host, murderer, faculty's office, angels, virtues, trumpet, pity, newborn babe, heaven's cherubim, couriers, heir, spur, vaulting ambition.
Yeah, I mean, if that doesn't sum up Mackers, I don't know what does.
But it's something that in print, when you have the time and the leisure to really luxuriate over all of these images, you get an awful lot. There's an awful lot to be gained out of that. But
100%.
In performance, it's hard to imagine that these complex and tangled thoughts and this rhetoric would be something that any audience member could fully grasp on first hearing.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it takes probably multiple hearings to listen and to actually comprehend all of the images that Shakespeare has written in. So our job as artists and performers, directors and everything is to at least give them the sense of what is going on and, to kind of tell that story, whether they get the, if they're going to get the images, great. And we want to obviously give them as much of the image as possible, to make sure that the story is coming across clearly. And then kind of going back to what we've been, what I've been saying, that's where I think the Folio has that value, where it does give you like those kind of guideposts of like, okay, these are the words that if you hit them, at least the story will be clear, because again, no modern audience is going to understand a lot of these images on first hearing, watching of the play.
Yeah.
I know as a teacher and as a performer and a director, and in many of the guests we talked to, one of the guiding principles would be you as the performer speaking these words need to be super absolutely clear on what you're communicating.
Right.
And if you're clear, you're going to make it easier on the audience.
Yeah, I mean understanding and comprehension is key. Obviously, it's the most important thing, especially in Shakespeare. I mean, in theater and performing in general, you want to make sure everybody knows what you're talking about. But yeah, of course, the clearer you are and the clearer image you have, that will be what pushes the audience into the show and it draws them deeper into these stories.
With the folio text that we've just been discussing, it's clear that it's open to many, many different interpretations. I mean,
and going back to what I had said, I think that's great because as a modern audience, you're reading it and it's like, oh, okay, I can see this image because it's modern, it's relevant to me, to what I look at every day, as opposed to something, we're talking about the horse and the jumping and all of that stuff. Not too many people ride horses anymore on a daily basis, But yeah, I mean, of course, with the folio, I think it just really gives you all of the options to work with. It's almost like reading sheet music. It's like, this is the music, this is what you need to do, this is the key, these are the rests, these are the quarter notes, the half notes, the full notes. Color it how you want.
Will, I think that's a great way to finish, because I think what you just said is absolutely eloquent and well stated. So thank you so much for joining us on the State of Shakespeare.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Will.
I'm Jim Elliott.
And I'm Garrett Vandermeer.
And thank you for listening to the State of Shakespeare.